for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. My name is Darren Gibson. I am the founder of this show as well as its lead host and executive producer. I will be hosting by myself today. We have a lot of updates to previous news stories we've talked about. We have an update on Representative Paul Gosar out of Arizona, Alex Jones, and a lot of other things to talk about here. So let's get into it. Before we get started, a couple of reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on Twitter at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime you like at Spreaker, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and Reason.fm by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and YouTube accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and KEPJ in San Antonio, Texas. So please be sure to listen to us there as well. I know the holidays are coming up. I know you're out buying gifts for your family and friends. Please do me a favor. Send a donation as well to your local Pacifica station, either of money or your time. They could actually use both. Our quote of the week comes from Bob Marley. When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will be at peace. I hope we see that at some point in our lifetime. It would be nice. So let's go right into our update from last week. Last week, in our Hammer Time segment, we gave Paul Gosar Douchebag of the Week because of an anime video that he posted that depicted him murdering Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat out of New York. Well, the House leadership was not going to put up with it for very long. I have this story. This is Christina Marcos writing for The Hill. This is dated November 17th. The House voted almost entirely along party lines on Wednesday to censure Representative Paul Gosar, Republican, Arizona, and take away his committee seats for posting an anime video depicting him violently attacking Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York, and President Joe Biden. Only two Republicans, Representative Liz Cheney out of Wyoming and Representative Adam Kinzinger out of Illinois, joined all Democrats as the House voted 223 to 207 to punish Gosar. Representative David Joyce, Republican of Ohio, voted present. So let me just stop right here real quick to point out that 207 evil, violent, conservative savages voted no on this measure. If they're not violent, they support violence. And there's no difference between the two. There is zero difference between the two. Supporting violence makes you a violent person. Period. End of story. Continuing. In an extraordinary scene, Gosar was forced to stand in the center of the House floor as Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, read aloud the resolution that made him just the 24th lawmaker in the chamber's more than 200-year history to be censured. Gosar will also be removed from the House Oversight and Reform Committee, where he has served with Ocasio-Cortez, as well as the House Natural Resources Committee. Democratic leaders had previously held off on allowing votes on resolutions to censure several other Republicans this year, primarily for promoting Donald Trump's false claims of 2020 election fraud or downplaying the severity of the traitorous, violent January 6th attack on the Capitol. I added traitorous to the story, because if you were there and you participated, you were a traitor. You're not a patriot, you're a traitor. But they ultimately decided that the edited anime video posted by Gosar last week, which portrayed him killing Ocasio-Cortez and swinging swords at Biden, went too far at a time when members of Congress face unprecedented levels of violent threats. Right now, I'm going to play Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's speech on the Capitol floor. This runs just a little over 6 minutes, but it's important stuff here. As you're listening to Representative Ocasio-Cortez's words, I want you to think about Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance, which is if you tolerate the intolerant take over. And she starts talking a little bit about it, not using those exact words, but it's the exact principle. Take a listen.
I've been serving in this body just under 3 years. In that 3 years, an enormous amount has happened. But in response to the Republican leader's remarks when he says that this action is unprecedented, what I believe is unprecedented is for a member of House leadership of either party to be unable to condemn incitement of violence against a member of this body. It is sad. It is a sad day in which a member who leads a political party in the United States of America cannot bring themselves to say that issuing a depiction of murdering a member of Congress is wrong, and instead decides to venture off into a tangent about gas prices and inflation. What is so hard? What is so hard about saying that this is wrong? This is not about me. This is not about Representative Gosar, but this is about what we are willing to accept. Not just the Republican leader, but I have seen other members of this party advance the argument, including Representative Gosar himself, the illusion that this was just a joke. That what we say and what we do does not matter so long as we claim a lack of meaning. Now, this nihilism runs deep, and it conveys and betrays a certain contempt for the meaning and importance of our work here. That what we do, so long as we claim that it is a joke, doesn't matter. That what we say here doesn't matter. That our actions every day as elected leaders in the United States of America doesn't matter. That this chamber and what happens in it doesn't matter. And I am here to rise to say that it does. Our work here matters. Our example matters. There is meaning in our service. And as leaders in this country, when we incite violence with depictions against our colleagues, that trickles down into violence in this country. And that is where we must draw the line, independent of party, identity, or belief. It is about a core recognition of human dignity and value and worth. So when we talk about, as mentioned in the resolution, that these depictions are part of a larger trend of misogyny and racial misogyny, racist misogyny. This has results in dampening the participation. And so this vote is not as complex as perhaps the Republican leader would like to make folks believe. It's pretty cut and dry. Does anyone in this chamber find this behavior acceptable? Would you allow depictions of violence against women, against colleagues? Would you allow that in your home? Do you think this should happen on a school board? In a city council? In a church? And if it's not acceptable there, why should it be accepted here? Lastly, when the Republican leader rose to talk about how there are all of these double standards and lists a litany of all these different things, not once did he list an example of a member of Congress threatening the life of another. This is not about a double standard, and what is unprecedented and what is tragic is the descent of transgression in this body. I grew up as a little girl with awe about our nation's capital. The reverence and the importance and the gravity of our work here.
Additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized.
The gravity of our work here. So the question that I pose to this body in response is, will we live up to the promises that we make our children? That this is a place where we will defend one another regardless of belief. That our core human dignity matters. If you believe that this behavior is acceptable, go ahead. Vote no. But if you believe that this behavior should not be accepted, then vote yes. It's really that simple. Thank you, and I yield back to the chairman.
That was a very powerful speech by Representative Ocasio-Cortez. Let me continue with the story from the Hill. Moments later, Gosar rose on the House floor to defend the video and argued it, quote, directly contributes to the understanding and the discussion of the real-life battle resulting from this administration's open border policies, end of quote. By the way, I'm not playing Gosar's speech. He doesn't need any more publicity than what he's already got. His words speak for themselves. His actions speak for themselves. Continuing, Gosar notably did not apologize for the video and used the term self-censored to describe his decision to eventually remove it from Twitter. Gosar said, quote, I do not espouse violence toward anyone. I never have. It was not my purpose to make anyone upset. Stopping here to say, bullshit. Continuing, I voluntarily took the cartoon down not because it was itself a threat, but because some thought it was. Out of compassion for those who genuinely felt offense, I self-censored, end of quote. The resolution rebuking Gosar states that, quote, depictions of violence can foment actual violence and jeopardize the safety of elected officials, as witnessed in this chamber on January 6, 2021, end of quote. The resolution continues, quote, violence against women in politics is a global phenomenon meant to silence women and discourage them from seeking positions of authority and participating in public life, with women of color disproportionately impacted, end of quote. Wednesday's vote marks the second time this year that House Democrats have moved to take away a Republican's committee assignments in the absence of any formal rebuke from GOP leaders. In February, Democrats, along with 11 Republicans, voted to boot Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, QAnon from Georgia, from House committees for her past embrace of conspiracy theories, such as suggesting some mass shootings were staged and appearing to endorse violence against Democrats. And I know she's a Republican. No, she's a cuckoo. By contrast, in 2019, GOP leaders stripped former Representative Steve King, Republican of Iowa, of his committee seats for appearing to question why the terms white nationalist and white supremacist were considered offensive following a long history of inflammatory remarks about race and immigration. Republicans warned Wednesday of a slippery slope where they might choose to remove Democrats from committees in retaliation if the GOP takes over the House majority in the future. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican of California, pointed to House Financial Services Committee Chairwoman Maxine Waters, Democrat of California, telling protesters earlier this year to, quote, get more confrontational, end of quote, about police brutality toward black people, and Representative Ilhan Omar, Democrat of Minnesota, saying that, quote, Israel has hypnotized the world, end of quote, as examples of remarks that Republicans might sanction. Well, I tell you what, I agree with both Waters and Omar. Maybe one of these days when I get some time, I'll record a lights out segment, and then I can really say how I feel. McCarthy said, quote, it means that under the Pelosi precedent, all of the members that I have mentioned earlier will need the approval of a majority to keep those positions in the future, end of quote. He then paused and cast his gaze on Democrats on the other side of the House chamber for emphasis. But Democrats maintained they had no qualms about setting a precedent of refusing to tolerate any lawmaker promoting violence. Pelosi said, quote, it is a sad day for the House of Representatives, but a necessary day, end of quote. Again, what are you going to tolerate? Are you going to tolerate intolerance, or are you going to squash intolerance? You need to squash it. Somebody says something dumb, you need to call them out on it and tell them they're dumb. If they continue to engage in the behavior, you need to shun that person. There's the start right there. Continuing. While few GOP lawmakers joined the effort to take punitive action against Gosar, some far-right members are pushing to take away committee seats from the 13 House Republicans who voted for the bipartisan infrastructure bill earlier this month. Representative Joyce said he voted present because he is a member of the House Ethics Committee. In a statement, he said, quote, I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to allow the Ethics Committee to do its job and address any alleged violations of the U.S. House of Representatives rules or any related conduct by House members, officers, or employees, end of quote. McCarthy discouraged his rank and file from punishing one another for their actions, whether against Gosar for the anime video or against the 13 Republicans who helped deliver a long-sought legislative victory for President Biden. Representative Dan Bishop, Republican of North Carolina, filed a motion on Tuesday to oust Representative John Katko, Republican of New York, as the top Republican on the House Homeland Security Committee for his vote on the infrastructure bill, but for now the GOP conference isn't taking it up. The sanctions against Gosar, one of the most far-right members of the House, are a long time coming. Representative David Cicilline, Democrat of Rhode Island, in May introduced a resolution to censor Gosar for his defense of a rioter who was fatally shot by a Capitol police officer while trying to breach the Speaker's lobby, which leads directly to the House chamber, as lawmakers and staff were still evacuating during the January 6th insurrection. Let me add, traitorous insurrection. During a House Oversight and Reform Committee hearing on law enforcement's handling of January 6th, Gosar described the rioter Ashley Babbitt as, quote, a veteran wrapped in an American flag who was executed, end of quote. Bullshit! I'll say it right here, right now. She had it coming. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Continuing. Democrats also widely condemned Gosar, along with Green, for proposing a new Trump-aligned caucus in April that called for a, quote, common respect for uniquely Anglo-Saxon political traditions, end of quote. The caucus ultimately never came to fruition after McCarthy obliquely tweeted that the GOP is, quote, the party of Lincoln and not nativist dog whistles, end of quote. Gee, you could have fooled me on that one there, Kev. Continuing. Gosar also spoke at a conference in February whose organizer had expressed white nationalist views. The last House member to face censure was former Representative Charles Rangel, Democrat of New York, in 2010 over a litany of ethics violations, including using official letterhead for fundraising purposes and failing to report rental income or pay taxes on a vacation home in the Dominican Republic. The other kinds of misconduct leading the House to impose one of its harshest punishments over the last 2 centuries have included engaging in violence toward fellow lawmakers, insulting colleagues during floor debate, supporting recognition of the Confederacy, and, in the 1980s, sexual misconduct with House pages. Lovely stuff, folks. Lovely stuff here. No, Gosar's own brother told CBS News that he believes that his brother Paul needs to be kicked out of Congress permanently. And I agree with him. Hell, his entire family produced a political ad campaign that said, "Don't vote for our brother, he's nuts." That's essentially what it said. Don't vote for our brother. We don't agree with him. We think he's loony. We think he's cuckoo. So, yeah, Paul Gosar, nut job. Unbelievable stuff, folks. Speaking of nut jobs, I want to get to this story. Here's some more good news for actual progressives today, folks. This is Ryan J. Riley writing for Huffington Post. This is dated November 17th. Jacob Chansley, the man federal prosecutors called the public face of the Capitol riot, was sentenced to 41 months in federal prison on Wednesday, one of the longest sentences handed down so far in connection with the events of January 6th. You know what I would have given him if I was the judge? 41 years, if not worse. The 34-year-old Chansley, who is a Donald Trump supporter known as the QAnon Shaman, and wore a Viking hat with fur and horns and carried a spear bearing an American flag when he stormed the Capitol, was sentenced by Judge Royce C. Lamberth. Last week, Lamberth sentenced a New Jersey man who assaulted an officer outside of the Capitol on January 6 to 41 months in federal prison. Assistant U.S. Attorney Kimberly Paschal told Lamberth on Wednesday, quote, "If the defendant had been peaceful on that day, Your Honor, we would not be here." End of quote. Referencing what Chansley yelled in the Senate chamber, Paschal said, quote, "Time's up, motherfuckers, is not peaceful, Your Honor. That's chilling." End of quote. She noted the letter Chansley left on Vice President Mike Pence's desk, which said, quote, "It's only a matter of time. Justice is coming," end of quote, was not peaceful. She called the note a threat. By the way, that is a direct quote. Paschal said that while Chansley did not assault police that day, the judge should note the tenor of January 6th and read the threatening note in that context. She also noted that Chansley called Pence, quote, "a fucking traitor," end of quote, from the dais in the Senate. Paschal, adding that Chansley engaged in obstructionist activities that day, said, quote, "None of what happened on January 6, 2021 was peaceful," end of quote. She asked the court to send a message to the flag bearer of January 6th and any other people, regardless of their political beliefs, that there are consequences for trying to obstruct American democracy. Lamberth said what Chansley did was horrific and terrible, and that while he believed Chansley had indeed changed and was apologetic, that he would not depart from the sentencing guidelines, which suggested a minimum of 41 months because of the, quote, "serious nature of the crime itself," end of quote. By the way, I don't believe he's changed. I don't believe he's apologetic. He's doing it to keep his vegan ass out of jail. I'll just say it. Continuing. Chansley, who pleaded guilty in September to a felony count of obstruction of an official proceeding, was among the first 30 rioters to breach the Capitol on January 6th and faced off with police officers outside the Senate chamber as senators scrambled to safety. Speaking before Lamberth just before he was sentenced, Chansley thanked the judge for moving him to another jail where he can get an organic diet. Well, you might as well Enjoy that while it lasts, because it ain't going to last where you're going, buddy. Chansley said, quote, I believe in freedom with all my heart and soul, but I also believe in law and order because without law and order, you can't have freedom. End of quote. Well, then why did you break the law? You don't believe in law and order. You believe in Donald Trump. That's what you believe in. You believe in the orange. Continuing. Chansley said he came to understand why Lamberth kept him locked up pre-trial and said that men of honor admit when they're wrong. Man of honor, that is laughable. Chansley said, quote, I was in solitary confinement because of me, because of my decision. I broke the law, and if I believe in freedom, if I believe in law and order, I should take responsibility. I needed the time to reevaluate. End of quote. Yeah. Chansley said he came to realize he was wrong for entering the Capitol, but said he was not an insurrectionist or a domestic terrorist, just, quote, a good man who broke the law. End of quote. Chansley said he would do everything differently if he could go back and relive January 6th. Yeah, I'm sure. Chansley's attorney Al Watkins said in September that his client, quote, repudiates the Q moniker, end of quote, and no longer wanted to be known as the QAnon Shaman and had started to move away from his belief in the QAnon conspiracy theory. Yeah, I'm sure he did. What else is that gullible son of a bitch going to believe? Because that's what you are. If you believe in this you're gullible. You're gullible. You need to pick up an actual book and read. Watkins said, quote, have I witnessed this traversing of a path away from QAnon by Jacob? Absolutely. Has he extricated himself such that his boots don't smell of QAnon? No, it's still there, and it's going to take time. End of quote. And by the way, let me add, the smell of QAnon, it smells like bullshit. On Wednesday, Watkins said the court was in a remarkably unique position both to hand out justice and to help bridge the political divide by showing mercy on Chansley. Watkins said, quote, he is accountable and wants to be held accountable, end of quote. The government asked for a sentence of 51 months in federal prison, saying his criminal acts had, quote, made him the public face of the Capitol riot, end of quote. Yeah, if I was the federal prosecutor, I'd be asking for life no parole, or worse. Sorry, traitors get what they deserve. And what they deserve is wrote in the Constitution. In the sentencing memo, federal prosecutors wrote, quote, armed with a 6-foot spear, the defendant brazenly marched past dozens of law enforcement officers with rioters throwing debris of all kind at those who opposed them, past broken windows and through doors ringing with alarm bells. The defendant was among the first 30 rioters to penetrate the U.S. Capitol building. The defendant then stalked the hallowed halls of the building, riling up other members of the mob with his screaming obscenities about our nation's lawmakers and flouting the opportunity to rid our government of those he has long considered to be traitors. End of quote. No, if he wants to see a traitor, he needs to look at himself in the mirror. Continuing, the Justice Department told Judge Lamberth that it was, quote, important to convey to future rioters and would-be mob participants, especially those who intend to improperly influence the democratic process, that their actions will have consequences, end of quote. The damage from January 6th, the Department of Justice argued, quote, will last far longer than the hours delay, end of quote, in the certification of the results of the presidential election. Prosecutors continued, quote, the world watched the actions of this defendant and others on January 6, 2021 shake one of the foundations of our democracy, the peaceful transfer of power after free and fair elections, and has made us all question the safety and security of the country in which we live. Those enormous harms born out of the acts of this defendant must be deterred so that we never see a similar assault on our democracy again. End of quote. Chansley's attorney argued in a sentencing memo that his client has, quote, mental health vulnerabilities, end of quote, and showed, quote, apparent Forrest Gump-like obliviousness too much of the activity and many of the actions of those surrounding him as he approached, entered, and traversed the Capitol. End of quote. Let me tell you, folks, I have 4 diagnosed mental illnesses. I have never given consideration to being a part of any group storming the U.S. Capitol. Just saying. Continuing, Chansley's father was incarcerated for the lion's share of Chansley's life, and his stepfather, who Chansley's lawyer said imposed extraordinary physical and mental abuse on his client, died by suicide in 2013. Chansley's lawyer said his client has now been diagnosed with schizotypal personality disorder, anxiety, and depression. Once again, I've got more of them. I've had breakdowns on this very show. Go back into the archives. It's not an excuse. It is not an excuse to go and storm in a traitorous fashion, storm the United States Capitol building. Asking the court to sentence his client to time served, Watkins wrote, quote, "Patience and compassion represent the only course that is medically appropriate, ethically appropriate, and legally appropriate. It is time for the shaman to start on his journey to freedom, not from jail, but from mental health infirmities of significance. It is time for Mr. Chansley to commence his journey from within." End of quote. Well, I will say 41 months in prison, he'll get his recommended daily medication. Wow. I really don't know whether to laugh or to just scream. 41 months is nothing. He needed 41 years. Or, better yet, I'll pull a Joe Elder right here. You give him a glass of water and a raw potato every day. There you go. Go back into the archives and listen for Joe Elder talking about the glass of water and the raw potato. I can be evil at times, but only to people that deserve it. I guess I really am passionate about justice for people that deserve justice. This guy doesn't deserve justice. Not at all. Somebody who is very important to me recently told me that I am important to them because I have a sense of justice for people that deserve it. I don't want to see poor people. I don't want to see homeless people. I want there to be opportunities for everybody, not just for the wealthy, not just for people who support the wealthy. Guys like Jacob Chansley, because that's what they are. They're no better. They really aren't. People like Jacob Chansley are no better than your Trump-loving next-door neighbor. They're exactly the same. They may not fall into the QAnon conspiracies, but they still support violence because they support Donald Trump. There's no denying it. You can't turn your eyes away from it, folks. You need to look at it. You need to stare it in the face and say, this is enough. We've had enough. We can't take anymore. That's why I say intolerance needs to be squashed by calling out your friends that say something stupid, by shunning them if they continue to say something stupid. I can't tell you the number of people that are no longer friends. Jack and I talked about it on last week's show. Somebody who for many years supported this show, but we walked away from him. Because when you support Donald Trump, you're part of the problem. You're not part of the solution. And as I've told people before, I'm not ending friendships over a difference in politics. I'm ending friendships over a difference of morals. That's the bottom line. Some more good news. I have this story. This is Dave Collins writing for the Associated Press. This is dated November 15th. A Connecticut judge found InfoWars host Alex Jones liable by default Monday in a defamation lawsuit brought by parents of children killed in the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting over the conspiracy theorist claims that the massacre was a hoax. The ruling by the judge, who cited Jones's refusal to abide by court rulings or turn over evidence, means a jury will determine how much in damages Jones should pay to the families. Shortly after the judge's decision, Jones went on his show and said he'd been deprived of a fair trial. Quote, "These individuals, again, are not allowing me to have a jury trial because they know the things they said I supposedly didn't happen. They know they don't have a case for damages, and so the judge is saying you are guilty of damages. Now a jury decides how guilty you are. It's not guilty until proven guilty." End of quote. Cuckoo! 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 Judge Barbara Bellis took the rare step of issuing a default judgment in the case because she said Jones and his companies, InfoWars and Free Speech Systems, had failed to turn over documents including records that might have showed how and if they had profited from spreading misinformation about the school shooting and other mass killings. The irony of Alex Jones owning a company called Free Speech Systems. Yeah, free to spread your nut job conspiracy bullshit. That's what your company should say. Continuing. Norman Pattis, a lawyer for Jones, said an appeal of Bellis's default ruling is planned. In an email, Pattis said, quote, "The ruling is founded neither in law or fact. We remain confident that, in the end, the Sandy Hook families cannot prove either liability or damages. We think their lawyers know this, hence the desperate effort to obtain a default." End of quote. You know, that's a question I have. Can there be an appeal of a default ruling? You didn't show up in court. You didn't provide the documents. You didn't do what the court told you. You don't get a second chance. Sorry, default. Continuing. His lawyers have asked that Bellis be removed from the case, alleging she has not been impartial. The ruling is the same outcome as a jury determining the case in favor of the families. A jury will now determine the damages. 20 first graders and 6 educators were killed in the December 2012 shooting. The gunman, 20-year-old Adam Lanza, killed his mother at their Newtown home before the shooting and killed himself at the school as police arrived, officials said. The shooting was portrayed on Jones's InfoWars show as a hoax involving actors aimed at increasing gun control. Jones has since acknowledged the school shooting did occur. I don't think he's changed his mind. What I think is he is giving the impression he changed his mind so he doesn't have to cough up a lot of money. Because that's one thing consistent with evil, violent, conservative savages. They never want to give up the money. Continuing. Families of the victims said they have been subjected to harassment and death threats from Jones's followers because of the hoax conspiracy pushed on InfoWars. They sued Jones and his companies for defamation and infliction of emotional distress. The hearing on damages before a jury is expected to be held next year. Christopher Maddie, a lawyer for relatives of 8 of the victims who sued Jones in Connecticut, said, quote, "What's clear from Judge Bellis's ruling is that Alex Jones and the Jones defendants have engaged in a long, continuous course of misconduct in this case designed to prevent the plaintiffs from getting evidence about Mr. Jones's business and about his motives for publishing lies about them and their families." End of quote. Messages were left for parents of some of the children killed in the shooting. A Texas judge recently issued similar rulings against Jones in 3 defamation lawsuits brought by Sandy Hook families in that state, finding Jones liable for damages after defaulting him and his companies again for not turning over documents. Hearings on damages also were ordered. In one of the lawsuits, a Texas judge in 2019 ordered Jones to pay $100,000 in legal fees and refused to dismiss the suit. And a jury in Wisconsin awarded $450,000 to one of the parents in his lawsuit against conspiracy theorist writers, not including Jones, who claimed the massacre never happened. In the 3 Connecticut lawsuits, Jones previously was sanctioned for violating numerous orders to turn over documents and for an angry outburst on his web show against Maddie. A judge barred Jones from filing a motion to dismiss the case, a ruling that was upheld after being appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which declined to hear Jones's appeal in April. So yes, more good news. I love it. Time to bankrupt Alex Jones. I'm sorry, it's not free speech. You're not allowed to just say whatever the hell you want to without any kind of proof. It's called slander if it's spoken. It's libel if it's printed. Libel and slander are not protected free speech. Once again, not all speech is protected by the First Amendment, nor should it be. Some of the laws in this country really need more teeth. Speaking of laws, here's a law that we really need in this country. This is the BBC reporting on November 12th. Listen to this, folks. Portugal has banned bosses from text messaging and emailing staff out of working hours as part of new laws dubbed right to rest. The move is part of changes being introduced to improve work-life balance in response to an expansion of working from home in the country. Companies with more than 10 staff could face fines if they contact employees outside their contracted hours. There are also new rules on allowing staff with children to work remotely. Parents will be allowed to work at home indefinitely without seeking prior approval from their employers until their child turns 8. And companies may also have to contribute to higher household bills from being home-based, such as energy and internet costs. Measures to tackle the isolation remote workers can feel are also included, with companies expected to organize regular face-to-face meetings. However, some elements of the package were not approved by Portugal's parliament, including a right to disconnect, allowing staff to turn off all work devices out of hours. Portugal's Minister of Labor and Social Security, Ana Mendes Godinho, told a conference in Lisbon last week that telework can be a game changer, but its growth needs to be regulated. She also hoped the enhanced labor protections would attract more foreigners to the country. Godinho said, quote, "We consider Portugal one of the best places in the world for these digital nomads and remote workers to choose to live in. We want to attract them to Portugal," end of quote. Portugal already has a temporary resident visa scheme designed to attract entrepreneurs and freelancers. The Portuguese island of Madeira has a digital nomad village with free Wi-Fi and office desk facilities. Several other countries have introduced so-called digital nomad visas as opposed to standard tourist permits, including Barbados and Croatia. So, wow, digital nomad village, that's interesting stuff there. The part that I like is that companies have to contribute to higher household bills from being home-based, including increased energy and internet cost. I can tell you this story. When I was running a Pacifica station in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area, my boss at the time allowed me, and he paid for it all, paid for the installation of satellite internet at my house so that I could remotely log into the computers and take care of the playlist and to take care of programming the station. He didn't have to do that. And it's actually one of the things that I appreciate him taking care of for me. So glad to see Portugal getting on board with being progressive. Some more good news on the labor front. I have this story from CBS News. This is dated November 18th out of Detroit. Deere and Company workers approved a new contract Wednesday that will deliver 10% raises immediately and end a month-long strike by more than 10,000 employees. The United Auto Workers Union said 61% of its members approved the deal with the tractor maker on their third vote, even though this offer was strikingly similar to one that 55% of workers rejected 2 weeks ago. Deere workers and other unions have been emboldened to ask for more this year because of the ongoing worker shortages and because workers didn't always feel appreciated while working long hours during the pandemic. This latest proposal made only modest changes to the details of Deere's internal incentive pay plan. The new contract covers 12 plants in Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas, where the Moline, Illinois-based company's iconic John Deere green agricultural and construction equipment is made. The company said work was to resume Wednesday night. After the last vote on November 2nd, Deere officials told the union not to expect the company to offer any more money, and Deere largely stuck to that promise in its latest offer, which it called its final one. The workers had been on strike since October 14th, and in recent weeks they have had to endure increasingly colder temperatures along the picket lines while trying to get by on the union's $275 in weekly strike pay or by finding another job. UAW President Ray Curry said in a statement Wednesday night, quote, UAW John Deere members do not just unite themselves, they seem to unite the nation in a struggle for fairness in the workplace. End of quote. Deere CEO John C. May said he is pleased that workers will be back on the job. Quote, building and supporting the industry-leading products which make our customers more profitable and sustainable. End of quote. In addition to the initial raises, this week's offer kept the 5% raises that were in the third and fifth years of the 6-year deal and 3% lump sum payments in the second, fourth, and sixth years of the deal. The offer would also provide an $8,500 ratification bonus, preserve a pension option for new employees, make workers eligible for health insurance sooner, and maintain their no-premium health insurance coverage. What Deere did in this latest offer was tweak the complicated formula it uses to determine which workers receive bonuses based on whether their team hits certain productivity goals. The changes in the formula can make it easier for workers to qualify for the incentive pay, but there are some Deere workers who aren't eligible for the bonuses based on the job they do in the company's factories and warehouses. The workers have been holding out for more from Deere, which has predicted it will report record annual profits between $5.7 billion and $5.9 billion when it releases its earnings report later this month. More than 90% of the workers rejected Deere's initial offer, but the second vote was much closer after the company essentially doubled the raises it was offering. Another group of UAW-represented workers went on strike earlier this year at a Volvo Trucks plant in Virginia and secured better pay and lower-cost health benefits after rejecting 3 tentative contract offers. Currently, about 1,400 Kellogg's workers have been on strike since early last month at the company's 4 U.S. cereal plants. Yes, and by the way, continue boycotting Kellogg's till the workers get a new contract. So, good news for Deere employees, good news for unions everywhere. Let's go to some medical and science news. I have this story. This is Rich Harity writing for newatlas.com. This is dated November 14th. Researchers at the Yale School of Medicine have developed a new kind of COVID-19 treatment designed to stimulate the body's immune defenses and fight off a coronavirus infection at its earliest stages. In preclinical animal tests, an experimental RNA molecule helped immunocompromised mice completely clear the virus from their system. When a cell is infiltrated by a virus, it releases proteins called interferons. These proteins signal to other cells that a pathogen is in the vicinity, triggering a number of antiviral defenses and interfering with the virus's ability to replicate. Some viruses have cleverly evolved methods to stifle an interferon response, allowing the virus more time to replicate before other immune system defenses catch up. Several early studies on SARS-CoV-2 revealed those who ultimately suffered severe COVID-19 demonstrated low levels of type 1 interferon production at the earliest stages of infection. So stimulating the body's initial interferon response as the virus is beginning to take hold could be an effective early treatment for COVID-19. To do this, researchers have developed a synthetic RNA molecule called SLR14. The molecule is designed to mimic genetic material from SARS-CoV-2 and subsequently activate specific receptors tuned to produce type 1 interferons. Across a series of animal tests, the researchers demonstrated a single dose of SLR14 protects from severe disease and death if administered either just before exposure to the virus or soon after initial infection. The RNA molecule was found to be effective against all current circulating variants of SARS-CoV-2, including Delta. The researchers also tested the treatment in an immunocompromised mouse model. Here, the animals were suffering from chronic, long-standing SARS-CoV-2 infections, and treatment with SLR14 was enough to stimulate an immune response that completely eradicated the virus. In the newly published study, researchers write, quote, "These results demonstrated that SLR14's utility extends beyond prophylactic antivirals, but also therapeutics that can be given to patients with immunocompromised conditions, providing an immediate solution to simultaneously cure chronic infection and suppress future emergence of immune-evasive variants." End of quote. Akiko Iwasaki, corresponding author on the new study, says this particular finding was surprising and spectacular. It indicates this kind of RNA therapeutic could be very useful in protecting immunocompromised patients who are unable to produce effective levels of antibodies or killer T cells. Iwasaki also points out these kinds of RNA therapeutics are much cheaper and easier to manufacture than more complex biologic therapies currently used, such as monoclonal antibodies. Plenty more work, including human clinical trials, will be needed before these RNA therapeutics are ready for widespread use, but Iwasaki says more research into this new treatment approach will help us better inform responses to the emergence of novel viruses in the future. Iwasaki says, quote, "SLR14 therefore holds great promise as a new class of RNA therapeutics that can be applied as antivirals against SARS-CoV-2. Moreover, because this RNA-based therapeutic approach is simple and versatile, our study will facilitate pandemic preparedness and response against future respiratory pathogens sensitive to type 1 interferons." End of quote. The new study was published in the Journal of Experimental Medicine. So there's some good news there. God, we could use that. And some more good news, the start of human trials on a nasal spray designed to prevent or to help stop the advancement of Alzheimer's disease. This is groundbreaking stuff, and this is all responsible due to science, not superstition, not praying to the invisible man in the sky. This is science, and it's great. I love it. Some more political news. This is Adam Brewster writing for CBS News, dated November 15th. Former U.S. Congressman and 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke announced Monday that he is running for governor of Texas. His campaign announcement video largely centered around the Texas power grid's failure during a winter storm in February. O'Rourke is hoping to capture the energy he brought to his 2018 U.S. Senate race when he lost to Republican Senator Ted Cruz by about 2.5 percentage points. O'Rourke used the momentum from that campaign to launch a run for president in 2020, but after a huge fundraising launch, he dropped out a few months before the Iowa caucuses after his campaign never had significant support in the polls. After that campaign ended, O'Rourke launched a political group focused on registering Texas voters and voting rights. He was a high-profile figure pushing back against Republican efforts to change Texas's voting laws over the summer. O'Rourke said the electricity grid failure and the response from state officials is, quote, "a symptom of a much larger problem that we have in Texas right now. Those in positions of public trust have stopped listening to, serving, and paying attention to and trusting the people of Texas. They're not focused on the things that we really want them to do, like making sure that we have a functioning electricity grid, or that we're creating the best jobs in America right here in Texas, or that we have world-class schools, or that we make progress on the things that most of us actually agree on." End of quote. Republican Governor Greg Abbott tweeted Monday about O'Rourke's positions on the left, perhaps offering a preview of the race to come. Abbott said that O'Rourke wants to, quote, "take your guns, defund the police, and supports the failing Biden agenda." End of quote. O'Rourke also announced that he would be making campaign stops in South Texas, where Democrats have been losing ground. In an event with Governor Abbott, longtime South Texas Democratic State Representative Ryan Guillen on Monday announced that he would be switching parties to become a Republican. The local redistricting effort has made his district more favorable to Republicans, according to the Texas Tribune. Abbott tweeted Monday that, quote, as Dems move further left, they're abandoning the people of South Texas and their values. Representative Guillen's decision to switch parties is indicative of a shifting landscape in South Texas, end of quote. O'Rourke is the first major Democratic candidate to enter the race. Abbott, the Republican incumbent, is running for re-election, but he will first have to defeat two Republicans challenging him from the right in the primary. Those include former Congressman and Texas Republican Party Chair Allen West and businessman Don Huffines. Huffines has said that his candidacy has pushed Abbott to be more conservative on issues like banning private business COVID vaccine mandates. Skipping down a little bit in the article, actor Matthew McConaughey has also talked about entering the race as a Democrat, but in recent interviews has suggested that he's not sure if holding public office is where he can be most effective. In an interview with the New York Times last week, McConaughey said that in his house, quote, we go slow on vaccinations even before COVID, end of quote. So there you go. So you've got Beto, who's a centrist Democrat. You've got Abbott, who's a nut job. You got West and this businessman, two more nut jobs. And then you got McConaughey, who's an anti-vaxxer, or slow on vaccine. No, you're an anti-vaxxer. You're a nut job too. And you're also privileged because you've got a lot of money. We're not in the same club that Matthew McConaughey is. Carlin said it. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. So you need to think about that. And I want to wrap up today's show with two quick off-the-cuff stories. The first one comes from NBC News, reporting that the U.S. Marshal Service finally got their man after 52 years. They've been searching for former bank teller Theodore John Conrad. He showed up to work at Society National Bank in Cleveland, Ohio on July 11, 1969. When his shift ended, he walked out of the building with $215,000 cash in a paper bag. Well, they just found him and identified him as living in Massachusetts since 1970 under the assumed name Thomas Randell. Conrad, or Randell, I guess depending on how you know him, just passed away in May of this year. So it took a while, but they got their man. The second story you're going to want to hide the kids from. Spin Magazine reports that the members of the band Brass Against had to apologize after their singer Sophia Urista dropped trow and peed on a fan's face during a concert. By the way, there is video of this. Urista has also since apologized for her behavior. I'm sure what happened was when the show was over, the band went up to her and said, "You're in trouble." Get it? Oh, that's bad. I know. Well, folks, that's going to wrap things up for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media and the First Amendment.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.